Do you want to hear a podcast?
Oh no.
Our old music got copyright claimed.
Everybody's just gonna turn it off like right away.
Come on. People are more likely to listen now. My name's Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And this is Literary AF Podcast.
That is true. We can tag it with Frozen now.
Then Disney will shut us down.
Yeah.
They'll send their copyright lawyers after
Oh
us.
no. Yeah, never mind.
But this isn't an amazing song cover podcast.
No, it is not.
Although it could be.
At this point, it could be.
It's actually a book podcast. And what book are we talking about today, Danny?
Today we're going to talk about The Night by Skye Warren.
Ooh.
And that's Night with a Knighd.
Oh, okay.
Because the first book was called The Pawn.
Oh, okay.
And
so
this one's called The Night. And the next one's called The Castle.
Just like that famous board game we all know. Knights, Pawns, Castles.
So this is the second book in the Endgame trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is following the same characters from the first book.
Okay, so refresh me just briefly on the first book.
So the first book was this high society debutante type lady.
Yeah.
Her father basically lost everything. And they were going to lose the house, and he got jumped and beat up, and he had huge medical bills. So her way to make money was to auction off her virginity.
Oh, okay.
So that was what that whole book was about.
It's not the one with the hotel owner who's picking up the thick girl, right?
No, it's not that one. That
Okay.
one was The King of Bourbon Street,
Oh, okay.
which I was actually talking about on Twitter this morning.
Oh.
Because I'll explain why later.
And it's not the one where the vampires and the Valkyries or whatever.
No, it's not Immortals After Dark either.
Okay.
This is its own.
And it's not the one where District 13...
Definitely not that one. Absolutely not that one.
So funny, I couldn't remember a single detail about Hunger Games other than district number.
13. Cool. Well, I don't even remember which one. That's the one they go to in the third book.
I think so.
I think so. The one that's supposed to be destroyed, but they're actually just all underground or something.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Something like that.
Well, anyway.
Anyways.
Good sidetrack. So what happens in this part?
So in this one, well, in the last book, it ends on, they sleep together.
Yeah.
And then he is like, okay, you can go now, and super cold.
Oh, that's right,
Yeah. And had, a really 50 Shades of Grey feel to the whole ending, where she just, runs out of the house, and then that's, the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a little bit more about where her house gets, foreclosed, and the company that's foreclosing on the house turns out to be the hero's holding company.
Okay.
So this book picks up, 2 weeks after that.
Ooh.
She's basically living in a motel now.
Okay.
And, she's, sworn that she's gonna get revenge on this guy for, I guess, A, buying her virginity, and then B, being cold about it,
Mm-hmm.
and then C, foreclosing on her house and taking it. So, I kind of I was hoping she would be more badass about it.
Okay.
Because this is another one that I gave 3 stars. They're not bad.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not doing it for me, I guess. They're alright.
Okay.
She starts this book off by swearing revenge on Gabriel Miller. And she's gonna go do that. And, she ends up, meeting with him in his office, and they have a discussion about the house.
Okay.
And the house is going up for auction, and she can't go to the auction because she doesn't have any money yet, because the money that he paid for her virginity is still in an escrow account.
Ooh.
And then they have a sexual encounter in his office, even though she was like, no, I'm gonna end this guy. This guy's an asshole.
Yeah.
Then that happens anyway, and she's like, well, I'm still gonna end this guy. This guy's still an asshole. I'm trying to remember, because I read this book a week ago. I read this, exactly a week ago, the first half of this book, and I can barely remember it, which is, it didn't make a huge impression on me.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling to bring it all back together. What ends up happening is he's like, okay, well, I'll take you to meet your air quotes uncle, the not quite her uncle, but her dad's best friend, who she calls her uncle.
Yeah.
Who also turned out to be like a huge pervert, and he was trying to marry her.
Okay.
For the sake of.
I remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that detail.
It was weird and bad. So they both go to him and ask him like what happened to the house. What's going on, because it was supposed to be in a trust in her name, and it got seized by the holding company, so something went wrong, and it turns out that he was stealing money out of her trust fund.
Ooh.
And he lost the house, and that's why it got taken, and now she has nothing. She and Gabriel, I cannot for the life of me remember her name again.
Oh, because it's
a first person book, and they don't say it on the back of the book.
We looked it up last time.
We did look it up last time.
I want to say it's Madison.
No.
Aubrey.
I think it might start with an A.
Angelica.
No.
Animalia. That's her name.
I cannot for the life of me remember her name right now. I'll try to look it up.
We even Googled it last time and couldn't find it on Google.
Yeah.
We had to look it up on Goodreads.
Yeah, that's what I'm pulling up as my Goodreads right now to see what her name is, because it doesn't even say it in the Goodreads description.
Yeah, great. I had to find a random review halfway down.
Avery.
Aubrey was close.
You were close. I knew it started with an A. I just couldn't remember. So, I forget where I was now because I got distracted by your name.
Somebody was stealing from a trust fund account.
Oh, yeah. So Avery's air quotes uncle, Landon, was stealing out of her trust fund account.
Uncle Landon?
Uncle Landon. That's his name.
I don't know.
They keep calling him Uncle Landon even though he's gotten, like, weird and pervy. And that's kind of awkward. And you probably should stop calling him Uncle when he gets like that.
Creepy Uncle Landon.
Creepy Uncle Landon. So what they end up doing is they get the money out of the escrow account, and she has exactly $1 million. And she's going to take that $1 million, and she's going to go to the auction to buy the house. Because when houses get foreclosed, they go up for auction, and they usually sell for, like, way under market value. I guess is what they say. I don't know whether or not that's true. But that's what they're saying in the book anyways.
I do know that the first part of that's true, that they go up for auction. They go up for auction.
Yeah. Well, this is like... So this is the setting is, I forget the name of the town or whatever, but it's like really high class. It's like high society, rich people, politicians, and lawyers, and like big money.
Washington, D.C.
And this is a house that is built in a super rich neighborhood. And they're expecting it to not go for over $1 million.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right.
It doesn't really...
I don't know enough about property values.
No, I don't. But, like, when you think of, like, the rich houses in Tuxedo or something... We live in Winnipeg, and we have a rich neighborhood, which is fittingly called Tuxedo. Those houses in that neighborhood go for, like, $5 million plus.
Yeah, Winnipeg, like, sucks.
Yeah.
So...
But I imagine, like, an American city where all the rich people congregate in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Like, I imagine that's going to be just jacked. But anyway, she goes to this auction with exactly $1 million. And her strategy is she opens the bid at $1 million.
Oh, that's such a bad strategy.
But everybody else leaves because they're like, oh, this is too much money for me.
Well, I guess it worked.
I guess
it's like going all in on your very first card in poker.
It's exactly what she did. And I guess the plan was to scare them off because it shows that she's willing to go extreme. Yeah, but the thing is, now she has no more money.
Yeah.
Because somebody else, like, bet above her, and it was over instantly.
Yeah, one person would say $1,001, and she'd be like, oh, darn.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. She bids $1 million, and somebody else is like, $1,001,001, and it's over. But what actually happened was, before the auction, she was walking around in the house, and she went up to the attic, and she found an old journal of her mother's.
Okay.
I don't know if I mentioned this in the last episode we talked about this, but her mother died in a drunk driving accident when she was a kid.
Okay.
And so she finds this, like, lost journal of her mom's, and she starts to read it. And, Gabriel is like, no, that's technically mine, because I own this house right now, because this is my company who owns this house.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you want this back, you can win the auction. And he just, like, takes it from her. He is a huge dick. And there's very little to, like, redeem that. It kind of, like, usually when you read a romance novel with a character who has a problem like that,
yeah,
they go through a redemption arc that will try to fix things. Maybe because I haven't read the third book yet.
Oh, maybe
so
that's when it comes.
It'll come eventually, but, like, the last 2 books, he's just been a huge penis. And there's been no, like, solid redeeming qualities about it. And, she loses the auction, basically. She loses the journal, because he didn't give it to her.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't remember what happens next. One of her friends has come to visit her at her motel, like her one best friend or whatever, is staying with her at this motel. And there's a homeless guy who's just, like, hanging around outside of it. His name is Will. And he's kind of, like, a new friend. So she just, like, made friends with the bum who lives outside.
Mm-hmm.
And they hang out for a little bit. There is a scene... I remember now. There is a scene where they smoke some weed. And I think it's just after the auction happens. So this is a perfect time to bring it up.
Okay.
They smoke some weed, and then they go smoke some weed with Will, who's the homeless guy living outside. And her friend's like, yeah, we'll do a cleanse or whatever. And then she just burns this huge chunk of weed in this burn barrel type situation.
Okay.
And they all get really high. And then Gabriel shows up, and he's like, he does that... I'm gonna keep mentioning, like, 50 Shades / Twilight, because there's a lot of connections in here.
Mm-hmm.
He does, like, the super possessive Edward thing where he just kind of, like, walks in and he picks her up and he, like, walks away with her.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, this is a bad situation, so I'm just gonna remove you from it without asking you first. And, like, walks her off.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know... So, I can't tell if the author just, like, maybe doesn't smoke weed, or it maybe just has different experience, because, like, well, for one, weed's legal in Canada, so
yeah,
we can smoke weed up here. I don't.
But we don't, because we're good Christian podcasters.
I do not, because in my past experience, it just makes me, like, sleepy and drowsy. So it feels like a waste of money. So I just don't. And
I don't know, I'm a big fan of sleeping.
That's fair. But it's not, in my experience, it's never like a solid sleep. It's just kind of like a drowsy kind of bleh. But what happens in the scene is essentially that, I guess, the drugs just make her really horny.
Okay.
And she's like super... She's not dizzy and there's like no negative effects to apparently the amount of weed that she consumed, except that she's just really horny. And then they have a talk, her and Gabriel, and they do some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, well, whatever, you're not gonna remember this in the morning anyway. But I've never had, like, I've never lost my memory because of weed. Has not been a thing that I've experienced either. So, I don't know. It was just weird. It was kind of awkward.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't really fit super well. So, trying to think of what ends up happening. Eventually, she goes to the den, which is where she originally went to meet Gabriel and Damon Scott, where she auctioned up her virginity. That's kind of like their bad guy headquarters type thing. And, they have another encounter. This is... I wouldn't call it an erotica, but there's a lot of sex in these books.
Oh, what's it ranking on our scale? 1 to 5.
Yeah.
1 being subdued, 5 being totally nude.
I would give it like a 3.
Oh, okay, so it's right in the middle.
Yeah, it's not anything to write home about.
Oh, okay.
But there's a bunch of boning in this book. So they do some more boning, and then he ends up giving her the journal, and she starts reading through it. And she realizes that her mom basically was in love with somebody else when she was engaged to Avery's father.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like well, I love this guy, but he has no money, and he comes from nothing, so, I have to marry the guy who has money, and I love him, and we'll sneak off together sometimes, and, I'll figure things out. And it kind of... It doesn't... There's also another plot where her mom's best friend, who, knew all of these secrets and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it turns out she was also actually in love with Avery's mom. And it's just, a whole lot of... She keeps comparing her mother to Helen of Troy.
Okay.
Because her mom's name was Helen. And it feels kind of forced.
And her mother launched 1,000 ships.
And her mother launched 1,000 ships, yeah. It'll come back up in a little bit, but basically everybody was in love with her mom. And, because Uncle Landon was in love with her mom. And that's why he has, a really weird, creepy thing for her now, for Avery. Because she looks like her mom, and it's gross. Avery's dad was in love with her mom. Her best friend was in love with her mom. And this mysterious fourth guy who had nothing who was in love with her mom. And, there's a point where Avery finds out that somebody broke into the house that she was trying to win back. After the auction, and a couple more days pass, and then she hears from somebody else when she's trying to track down leads on who this mysterious guy is.
Okay.
She finds out that somebody broke into the house and was writing derogatory terms on the walls, and somebody posted a bunch of nudes of her and were handing them out to people. Basically everybody's seen her boobies. And she thinks that Gabriel did it because they were boning a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so she goes to confront him, and he's like, well, no, I didn't do that. I wouldn't let anybody see you, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is they talk about how the guy who owns this house,
yeah,
the one who won the auction by betting barely more than she did, he's gonna be throwing a ball in the house.
Ooh.
And the guy who won the auction is actually... So, Gabriel Miller is this underground crime guy. His boss is a guy called Damon Scott, who we talked about last time, because he has 2 books that come after this.
Yes, that's right.
That are the spin-off series about Damon Scott.
And those are the ones you're really looking forward to,
And those are the ones
right?
that I really want to read, yeah.
Okay.
So it turns out Damon Scott's father is the one who bought the house.
Oh, okay.
And they find out that the reason he bought the house is because he was the mystery guy who her mom was in love with.
Ah, okay.
So he buys the house, and now he's going to be throwing a party there. They also talk about... I can't remember how they come to this conclusion, but basically they realized that her mother was not just killed by a drunk driver.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably somebody had her killed type situation.
Ooh.
Because she starts, her journal starts getting really paranoid about how, the house is listening to her, and it feels like somebody's watching her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets it escalates a little bit.
Okay.
And so they assume somebody had her killed, because she was probably going to be leaving Avery's father to go to Jonathan Scott, the mystery guy from the book.
Okay.
So somehow they decide that the person who likely had her mother killed is going to be going to the ball tonight.
Okay.
So they go to that, and her father has been bedridden for months. and then he had a heart attack like 2 weeks prior.
Jeez.
And he's like, he can't move, he's been unconscious for weeks, and he's just in a bad situation.
This guy's got a rough go of things.
He does. But they get to the party, and so following people are there. Jonathan Scott, who is the mystery man.
Yeah.
Her mother's best friend, who was in love with her. And Uncle Landon is there, because of course he is.
Creepy uncle, yeah.
And then just assorted high society people are all over there. And then just her dad walks in. And she's like, how and why, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And because they're under the assumption that the person who had her mother killed is probably going to be at the party tonight.
Okay.
They're like, it's basically like, it's going to be one of these people. Who could it be?
Oh, yes, you texted me about this.
I sent you a text because this is just the weirdest situation. Is she follows her father has just like he's walking with a cane, but despite the fact that he's been bedridden for the last like 3 weeks and mostly unconscious, he like clears the room and he's up the stairs in no time at all. So it's kind of weird. And they go into his office and he's standing there and they confront him and they're like, "Hey, we read the journal. You know, things are not adding up. Things are kind of weird." And they kind of accuse him because it kind of looks like maybe he was going to have his wife killed because she was going to leave him.
Yeah.
And then, like, from the doorway, her mother's best friend, whose name I can't remember, she comes in and she's like...
Queen Latifah.
Yeah. She comes in and she accuses Avery's dad of wanting to kill her. And then... she moves into the room, and then Uncle Landon comes in through the door, and he's like, "Yeah, but you've loved her this whole time," to the best friend. It's just like a really weird situation where all of the suspects come into the room one at a time to accuse the previous suspect of having killed Avery's mother.
Amazing.
It was weird, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. But they have this discussion about who could have done it and why, and then... Avery kind of realizes, like, well, what if my mom was in love with Jonathan, but Jonathan was actually the bad guy? And because he's the only one who didn't, like, come up into the office to be like, well, maybe it was you. And, I don't even know how she thought to do this or why, but she basically breaks a hole in the wall of the office.
Okay.
And they find... like wires and cameras and microphones and stuff. And there's like a secret room that like looks into the bedroom and stuff like that. And I guess it's been Jonathan the whole time. Like their reasoning behind this was kind of very loose at best. It didn't make a whole lot of sense how they got to this conclusion. But basically, Jonathan Scott was a bad guy, and he bugged the house, and that was what kind of like drove her mom kind of crazy. Okay. And there was like a secret room in the wall, so I guess he was just inside the house sometimes.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, but this all gets interrupted, like this whole revelation gets interrupted when the house just catches fire. I guess he probably set the fire, and they have to evacuate, and there's a scene where, oh no, Gabriel didn't come out of the house because he was trying to save somebody, so she rushes into the house to save him, and and then they free him, and they get out, and now nobody can find Jonathan Scott. He's gone underground and he's hidden, and that's kind of where it leaves off.
Oh, that's where the book ends?
Yeah.
Oh my
There's
gosh.
like an epilogue of like 2 weeks later. She's living in Gabriel's house because they've upped her security and because they've realized now that Jonathan's the bad guy. So
okay, so just I'm trying to figure out Gabriel's character.
Gabriel.
So he was the one from the first book, right? Yeah,
he was the guy from the first book who bought her virginity.
So but then he turned into a jerk, right?
And then they had sex, and then he turned into a jerk.
And in this book...
And then in this book, she swears revenge on him and goes to see him about the house that his company foreclosed on that was her house. Yeah. And then they end up banging it out. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm going to come with you on this adventure to get your house back. And they just keep banging it out this whole time.
Okay, so that was what I was confused about. Yeah. I knew you said that they were hooking up after... But then I still remember her being mad at him, so I was kind of wondering if
they're still hooking up, but she was still mad at him.
Oh, okay.
And then, there is a revelation, I guess, where it turns out that her father is also...
the greatest dancer in the European ballet.
No, he's actually also a really bad person.
Oh, okay.
Because I guess he had... Well, first off, he was, like, charged for fraud and embezzling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what he also did was he sold his business to Gabriel, and part of that deal was that Gabriel would get Avery.
Oh,
like, he
okay.
sold his daughter in this transaction to Gabriel, and...
Everyone sounds very sketchy in these books.
Everybody is extremely sketchy in these books. Like all of them.
I thought
terrible.
Creepy Uncle Landon was the worst possible character, and now he's like halfway down the list now.
Yeah, no, everybody in this book, like all of the dudes in this book are terrible. And
just like real life.
So
just kidding, Kings. I got your back.
So her dad sold her to Gabriel. And then everything happened and it all fell through, and Gabriel had him, like, outed and shunned from society and whatever.
Jeez.
And then they did the whole auction thing, and Gabriel had basically been intending to pay for her.
Yeah.
Like, for the entire time. The rest was just like, well, if I had made good on my purchase with your dad, you would have not come to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's a bit much. It's a lot, really. So, the epilogue is she's staying with Gabriel and they've upped the security.
Yeah.
And she has tracked down and purchased a portrait of her mother that used to be hanging in the house.
Okay.
And when everything was being sold off for money, because she had none, this picture went to some rich guy because it was painted by a famous artist or something.
Mm-hmm.
And she tracks down the painting and she buys it. And she gets it sent back to Gabriel's house. And she opens the painting, like, out of the package, and somebody has, like, removed her mother's portrait from the frame.
Okay.
And painted a near identical picture of her and put it in the frame. And then sent that to her. So they're like, is this a threat? I don't know. And then the book ends.
Weird.
Yeah.
What an ending.
Yeah, so...
How do you rate this book?
I gave it 3 stars.
3 out of 5.
Yeah, 3 out of 5.
So...
yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe the last book will, like, bring it all together and will improve my opinion on this, but...
You know what?
It's a lot.
When it comes to, like, mystery-type books, like, because there seems like there's an element of mystery in these books.
Kind of, yeah.
I hate... I hate when they stretch it over a series.
Yeah.
Like, have a mystery, and you need some closure in each story, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, the closure in this story was, we figured out who the bad guy is. And now it ends on, the bad guy's out there, and he's probably gonna hurt people. Like, that's... I don't know. This is why I'm not a huge fan of, like, books that carry the same characters over multiple, like, books.
See, like, it can work sometimes. Like, I mean...
Yeah.
Like, I hate to go back to Harry Potter all the time, because I'm not actually the hugest Harry Potter fan.
Yeah.
I'm, like, middle-of-the-road Harry Potter fan.
Yeah.
But, like, those are books where it's, like, the same characters carry over, there is an overarching story, but each book is its own story.
That's the thing, is, like, each year in Harry Potter was its own beginning, middle, and end. Whereas these books have chopped up the beginning, chopped up the middle, and chopped up the end, and they're all their own separate things, basically.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work as well as something like that does.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'll read the last one, and then I'll come back to you with an opinion on the whole series, but at this point, it's just a solid meh.
Yeah, I would like to hear that.
I want to see if he gets a redemption. Like, that's kind of the only thing that's really keeping me around, is to see if they can, like, pull it around and make me like him as a character, or if it's just going to be, this is who he is,
Yeah.
Deal with it.
How did, we've never talked about 50 Shades. Like, I mean, we've mentioned it here and there.
Yeah, we've talked about it here and there, yeah.
But have you read the whole series?
I have read the first 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of curious how they do that. Like, if he gets redeemed at all by the end.
I think this is a discussion for a whole episode, really.
Yeah.
We should probably... at the very least, I will read them, and maybe you can watch a movie or something.
Yeah, I'll watch the movies.
And we can talk about it, because it's a whole thing. Actually, there's a really good video on
that we've
YouTube.
talked about before.
Yeah, have we talked about that video?
We have, yeah.
Okay, like Folding Ideas or something?
Yeah.
That's a really good video. So, just... this does tie into, because you mentioned the King of Bourbon Street.
Yes,
which was the mogul who has a thing for the super thick heiress.
Yeah.
And that was something that I was thinking of while I was trying to finish this book. Because it's like, well, this book was kind of but it made me think of other books that I really liked.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I was done this, I was like, this wasn't that great. Remember that book that was really good, though, was King of Bourbon Street. If you haven't read The King of Bourbon Street, definitely check it out. It's great.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well...
That's about it.
Just hitting our normal time.
Cool.
So half of a Monte Cristo
half
episode.
of a Monte Cristo episode, yeah.
Next week I'm going to try to read, if you guys want to try to read ahead, I'm planning on doing A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy O'Toole, I think.
Okay.
Or something like that. People have hailed it as the funniest book ever written. I have opinions on that.
Oh boy.
It is entertaining for sure.
All right.
But yeah, so that's if you want to read. It's not too long. I think it's like between 200 and 300 pages, I'd say.
Okay.
And I think it was written in like the 70s. I want to say that.
Not as old as your usual books are, but
no, it's like I don't know. I usually like I've done a few classics in a row.
Yeah.
And like when we first started, I did like a classic, and then I did like a mystery, and then I did like I had a little more variety, so I'm trying to get back into that.
Sure.
But yeah, so if you want to read that for next time, Danny, where can people find us?
People can find us on Facebook, LiteraryAF. You can find us on Twitter, LiteraryAFPod. You can send us an email, literaryafpod@gmail.com, or you can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or Podbean, LiteraryAF.
And don't forget to read books. Do we need an outro song?
Do you have an outro song on hand?
No, I was going to sing. Do you want to build a snowman again?
No.
Books. Why don't you read one?